Is it just me, or the past 3 years have been a train wreck of bad games getting released by big names in the industry that flopped harder than a fish pile driven onto a concrete street? Just look around this graveyard of disappointment. Skull and Bones, Redfall, Payday 3, Suicide Killed the Justice League, Saints Row Remake, Star Wars Outlaws, Kerbal Space Program 2, Forspoken, Starfield, and basically every Call of Duty remake after the Modern Warfare 2, thanks to shitification. Or how about some bizarre anomalies like Golem or straight up scams like the day before? Even the recently well-received Avowed can only be called okay at best. And at worst, we get garbage like Concord, Unknown 9, and a slew of other high-budget failures. So what the hell is going on? Did AAA gaming suddenly start sucking more? Or is it the downfall of modern gaming? Looking at the horizon with the upcoming Ghost of Yotei, with the core development team from Tsushima being replaced by... Then there's Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Shadows already being the stillborn failure before launch. The past half-decade of mainstream gaming has been a shit show of bloated budgets, mismanagement, and underwhelming releases. Or what about Redfall? Estimated budget of about 80 to 150 million over 6-year development, now basically dead, with developer Arcane Austin shut down. Kerbal Space Program 2, 100 developers over 4 years of development, now deader than a doornail in the coffin of Dracula, with the development studio closed along with its publisher. Payday 3, shitting the bed with a live service that no one is playing it on Steam despite the massive player numbers on launch. Starfield, technical execution and story writing failures exposing Bethesda's utter incompetence, driving player numbers so low we need to unearth dinosaur bones before we find the player base. Or what about a cavalcade of third-person high-budget action-adventure slop like Forspoken, Unknown 9, Star Wars Outlaws, and more, all of which have estimated minimum of $50 if not $100 million budgets. And let's not even mention the utter failure that was the Concord. There's the cherry on top. Has every mainstream so-called AAA or big-budget game failed spectacularly in just the last 3 years? Well, clearly not. Black Myth Wukong, Stalker 2, Kingdom Come 2, and Baldur's Gate 3 proven the opposite. But generally, those are considered AA studios by most standards of the industry experts or shills. Even so, what caused this recent seemingly rampant ratio of flaming trash getting trebucheted at the general public, and the public raising a large middle finger in response? What caused the failure of modern games? Well, since I touched and even covered some of them, I think I can hazard a, shall we call it, an educated guess as to why. After lengthy research, I call watching my fellow creators perusing garbage articles written by industry shills calling themselves gaming journalists and smashing my face against the brick wall for a solid week, I think there are 4 reasons for the failure of the mid-2020s video game. Boring, uninspired gameplay, weak, formulaic writing, the live service plague, and horrendous mismanagement. But there is certainly more to say than just simply stating these things, so let's break them down like Bambi's legs after hitting a proverbial speeding train before derailment. If the gameplay is boring, well, why should you play the game, right? Seems obvious. And if there is one thing we can rely on, it's that the most, if not all, AAA games tend to at least polish their gameplay more than the average game. Still, despite not being painful to play or having too much jank, the bare-bones gameplay that works is still inferior to something cool, interesting, or unique. For example, let's take your typical third-person action-adventure slop, Forspoken, Unknown 9, or most of all, Star Wars Outlaws. Mechanically, they all work and can be called well-made games. However, where they all fail is in bland, boring, and formulaic gameplay. The whole is lesser than the sum of its parts. Let's take, for example, character movement. In these games, it's pretty good and well-polished, most certainly better than in smaller games, and yet, this complete game is trash, while some of these a lot smaller games are praised and loved. Why is that? Since Star Wars is a bigger example, it perfectly showcases this. It has Star Wars IP to take from, a decent art style and pretty visuals from time to time. So then why does it struggle to crack 3,000 players on Steam on launch? Well, the answer is simple. It's generic, bland, boring, pedestrian, if you will. It's especially clear with these third-person action-adventure games. The mainstream big-budget games lack any kind of innovation. Now, Forspoken had writing issues as well, but gameplay-wise, it looked and felt like any other third-person action-adventure game, not to mention immediately forgotten Unknown 9. So, what was so special about it?
I'm excited. I'm excited for people to hopefully feel empowered by this character who is so grounded, so inspired by like things that are outside herself, bigger than her.
Oh, Indian-looking main character? Well, color me fucking impressed with this diversity. Well, guess what? No one cares. It's like a corporate boardroom designed and developed this. And this is the problem. The creative minds, the capable artists are given paint-by-numbers canvas. Sure, they will do a solid job and coders will make an ample effort to make everything function correctly. Hell, designers might even put a little bit of fantasy flair in some mechanics, but at the end of the day, the product is still made to appeal to everyone. So it captures no one. There is no edge, no spark, just formulaic gameplay that we have seen everywhere already by now. It's like the corporate suits were running a distillery and came up with a pure essence of mediocrity they thought everyone liked. Well, sure, it's not offensive and it works right, but you know what you remove with distillation? The toxic crap, or in the corporate world, the fun. People at the top of these massive projects just want safe and solid products. Content, if you will, for the masses to gobble up. But Pikachu face when the emotion and joyless experience does not capture anyone. Now, recently I played Avowed, and though it's not exactly joyless, the combat is pretty interesting at times even, it still surprised me just how empty the game itself was. Picking up random mugs or props, cauldrons for example, sticking them on top of NPCs was not possible. Yep, every item in the world is static. As in, unmovable. Ragdolls only exist when you kill an opponent and they fly off once, otherwise no spell, gunshot or any other action allows you to interact with the corpse. Water does not react to anything being tossed in it. Even NPCs stand still in the same place doing one animation like some bizarre stone pillars. But the final insult for me was when the character mentions, "Oh, well, this is a bad part of the town, so watch your coin purse, okay?" When there is no stealing or damaging NPCs in the first place. And this is supposed to be an exciting, vibrant, fantasy open world? I mean, yeah, I guess it's fantasy for sure. It's fantastically static. Hell, the fucking Postal 2 had more open world than Avowed. I wish that was a joke. I mean, sure, it could be okay for a first-time developer, but Obsidian, who made this, previously released better games that had all of these things I mentioned before. And it gets only funnier on a technical scale when Avowed runs on Unreal 5 engine and enabling props to have physics is literally just one checkbox click away. I mean, talk about distillation, but I digress. But the bottom line is these big budgets and development teams produce stale and bland gameplay as a result of fear for innovation in gameplay. All of this to either recreate a better experience from the past on the cheap, or to appeal to more people, trying to offend or exclude as little as possible, turning a promising game concept into a corporate, high-budget slop. I mean, sure, you can guzzle it down in big quantities, but at the end of the day, you'll only remember it ever again once. When you go take a shit. Oh, but hold on, TheYamiks, the gameplay can be basic. I mean, just look at Last of Us. But as long as the story is great, the game can still succeed, right? Yeah, about that. The next thing that modern games tend to suffer from is weak, uninspired, and in some cases, injected writing. Case in point, Starfield and Dragon Age being the more prominent examples, although Forspoken, Call of Duty, and others are just as guilty. Now let me explain. In mid-2000s, Call of Duty used to be about that 90s era over-the-top spectacle with massive set pieces that felt epic. Modern remakes of those games attempt to be more serious, overproduced drama plays without the set pieces that made the original stick in your memory. No controversial, no Russian mission, no nuke in your face or a snowmobile jump. Just overproduced, toothless stakes. Like for example in Modern Warfare 3 Remake, Soap gets killed, and no, I'm not sorry about spoiling it. The moment was so meaningless, I struggled to even register it happening. Which is kinda funny that the only moment I cared for was this little stupid moment.
2 goldfish are in a tank.
Go on.
One turns to the other and says, "You know how to drive this thing?" Little army humor.
Very little.
Another.
Why not?
However, the biggest problem in modern game writing is the utter failure to connect. And that is why I remember that stupid goldfish joke more than anything else. Now you can start shouting, everything's woke and all that stuff like some fucking retard. I don't care. Now give me the most gay, transsexual, otherkin furry and I'll love the story. If there's actually a reason for the character to be the way they are and it mattering. See, a good story draws you in because it made you care about it. Case in point, Cyberpunk and Witcher. Both of these games have massive cinematic flares and, well, questionable gameplay at times. But thanks to well-presented story, even more bland interactions are interesting due to characters being interesting and captivating. Contrary to that, we have something like Starfield, where the writers just kept on writing verbal diarrhea, repeating sentences, and pointlessly drawn-out expositions. No wonder they bragged about the voice line count. And that static camera, oh gods, kill me please. With little to no character emoting or gods forbid animations, you start to question if it's not all just simply AI generated. Scenes, motherfucker, do you speak it? And the same horrible dialogue diarrhea I noticed in Avowed as well. Get to the point.
We have tried. We cannot, and we are afraid.
3 sentences saying the same thing. And you know what? There is this saying, show, don't tell, which applies to games even more than movies or TV. And yet somehow I doubt that these massive $80+ million games would lack the money for screenwriters to make scenes and animation departments to make animations. And then there's the other side of the writing, the injected woke kind. Now, let me be blunt here. Fuck both ends of the culture war spectrum. Still, we cannot pretend that such consultancy agencies like Sweet Baby Inc. haven't manipulated and bullshitted their way into injecting themselves into industry. No longer you'll see a provocative or challenging or even questionable characters in stories. It's been replaced by more inclusive, softened narratives. Or worse, pointless, what is known as diversity insertions to pander to some non-existent.
Now we have the opportunity to tell a new Indiana Jones story for a modern gaming audience.
Now granted, some of this stuff can be overgeneralization, but to be clear, fuck the culture war retards. I just want my most gayest trans otherkin furry abomination character if it means their story, struggles, joy and identity is presented well. God damn it, I just want to feel something, not just loathing for the writers, self-insert characters like it's some sort of shitty fanfiction.
And this time, no dragon escaped.
Thanks to Tosh.
That's why we recruited her.
Actually, Tosh uses them for themselves now.
They asked us to let folks know, so now you do.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Thank you for telling me. That's why we recruited them.
Now, Dragon Age Veilguard being the more recent example of this. Now, sure, out of context, this scene is incredibly stupidly written, but even within the context, I struggle to give a shit about the character, due to just how poorly explained and presented their struggle is. Also, I've heard from fans of Dragon Age series mention that, well, the game series when it first came out, it was very brutal and grown up, you know, meaning sexy and dark themes. But with each sequel, it seemingly got dumbed down and more risque parts being softened up until the infamous scene we got here.
So, I'm non-binary.
Now to contrast this, God of War series is a perfect example of maturing the story so well, making us care so much more about this testosterone brick called Kratos.
But this is the problem with Indiana Jones. I don't want these characters to grow. I don't give a fuck what you're going through at the studio. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. If you're going to build a brand new IP, or you're going to build a character into the God of War lore, and that character is struggling or dealing with your problems that a lot of you guys that have gotten older and girls at the studio have dealt with, that's wonderful. Do that shit all day long. But don't take the character Kratos or Indiana Jones and go, you know what? I'm Steven Spielberg. I'm older now, and I'm really into family, and I want to tell stories about fathers and sons and God. No, fuck you. That is not what this character is, whether it's Indy or whether it's the goddamn Kratos, okay? I just... Stop.
And this is where I completely disagree with the original game designer / director. This is how you make people give a shit about your character, actually exploring their feelings. Now, even if it is done through grunting. You know, show don't tell. Not just abrupt, awkward, and uncomfortable writing of...
It isn't a blighted dragon's lair.
Fair point.
Okay, bye.
Though I railed against Veilguard here, it's just an example of clunky, stiff, and all-round weak writing that does not draw you into the character's story. And sure, you could dismiss this as, oh well, it's just a side character, it's side romance. Well, in that case, we can perfectly contrast this between Baldur's Gate 3 characters as well. But at this point, it'd be like beating a dead horse with a golden baseball bat. The point being, this incompetent writing mainly comes in two forms. One is fanfiction long-winded overwriting and the failure to condense the story. Well, much like most of my scripts, but anyways. And the second one is injected narrative, that is made to pander to certain demographic without actually exploring it. Either case, both are met with additional failure to connect with the audience and present themselves well. Remember, there is still a reason why Mass Effect games, well, at least the first two ones, are still remembered so vividly, even when their gameplay was hot garbage. But let's say, like Call of Duty or Payday, you have very polished gameplay that actually is kind of fun. How could you fuck it up then? Well, of course, by using live service! Suicide Squad being the poster child of the soulless garbage pumped out by an overinflated AAA studio. This game was dead on arrival for every reason we explored thus far, but the biggest sin that led to soulless gameplay and nothing burger story was the corporate greed to milk their potential customers as much as humanly possible. This always online chokehold with seasonal battle passes and microtransactions nickel and diming the customer with barely enough interesting rather than fun gameplay until the next batch of digital slop gets dumped out is what live service is all about. Every big game company is salivating to get their hands on a perpetual money machine that very few live services turned out to be, most notably Destiny. Now, when Payday 3 was announced, even with the turbulent development, the fanbase was incredibly excited for the sequel. However, the Payday 2 was playable offline. So, what do you think happened when the fanbase was greeted by the mandatory always online requirement for the third game? Well, it was a universal fuck no! As a matter of fact, I actually covered both the failure of this game as well as the success of the second game, so go check out if you need more information about it. But to date, Payday 3 still sits below 1,000 average players compared to several tens of thousands for Payday 2. There honestly is no clearer cut picture than this. Even now, over a year after the release and several updates later, the game is fucking dead. That's how much the Payday's community hated being forced onto always online servers, for a game that had really no fucking reason to be. And this is not a one-off story either. Redfall, yeah, this game's even more dead, you could call it cadaverific. A 4-player co-op game that was, well, basically Left 4 Dead, but with vampires and looter-shooter mechanics. Do you think it needed to be always online connected to servers, let alone ones operated by Bethesda? Oh! Fuck you! Fuck you, Bethesda, and fuck you, ArcNet, and fuck you, Arcane! But here you go. Yeah, let's just make sure you can't pirate the game, blah blah blah. And most importantly, you always get advertised our new drop slop, blah. I mean DLC, microtransactions and battle passes, blah. There is no escape, idiot, blah. Now yeah, you could say that this was just Bethesda forcing poor Arcane Austin Studio to make this. But you know what you should definitely blame them for? Closing the studio and leaving the game in an unfinished, broken state while refunding only the DLC for the game. Well, hey, at least Concord did the right thing and refunded everything. However, talk about missing forest for the trees. They tried to make a hero shooter in an age where the genre is oversaturated to such a degree that it would make MMORPGs blush. However, you could say that, well, hey, Marvel Rivals is basically a live service and a hero shooter as well. And that's hopping today. Yeah, well, this is where the other problem for Concord came. The utterly uninspired, talentless character design, most definitely impacted by a certain consultancy firms, turned whatever could be an interesting design into an utterly generic and downright ugly designs. Less than a month. Yep, that's how long it lived, or should I say stillborn on a life support. All thanks to the sheer wish to break into the perpetual money machine that is the fraud of live service gaming. But what happens if it actually works out at first? Well, if you're learning from Rivals, then a lot of developers get laid off. Or in the case of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops 6, and shitification ensues. Modern Warfare 2 was actually a very nice experience with genuinely rewarding unlock system and good variety of game modes and gameplay. At first. Now sure, the critic TheYamiks had its disagreements, but for the general public it was a good value for a spunk baby woo-woo game. As for Black Ops 6, the story was kinda shit, gameplay was no different, but the big selling point was the zombies, and I agree. Even right now, the zombies mode is great to play. And you know why? Because you don't get to see this. Is this really Call of Duty? Holy shit. Just through sheer nickel and diming, the nonsensical and often incredibly idiotic tie-ins, shitty looking skins or battle passes for more shitty skins, Activision managed to completely ruin even the few good things left. And then no wonder on Steam when you see the game closing in on the negative overall. The term and shitification perfectly describes this. The same problem plagues all the Call of Duty games ever since Modern Warfare 2. It releases, yeah, it's a live service game, but it's kinda fun. Then skip a few months after the release and you're swimming through the pure visual trash like you're taking a plunge in Ganges River. This is eventually what happens to every live service game. Some do it less, sure, but the stink of corporate greed is always there. Ruination of the game's original art style, nickel and diming you for cheaply made cosmetics or worse. Pay to win shit like buyable XP boosters that help you save time. And let's not forget that you need to access their servers in the first place to play. Even if it makes no fucking sense like playing zombies alone or playing campaign. Oh, and of course, let's not think about what happens when the servers are closed one day. Well, guess what? The game is fucking dead! Now go support Stop Killing Games. And the final nail in the modern games is the jumble of little things that can be generalized under a term development issues. Crunch periods that led to developer churn and lack of creativity, half-baked gameplay releases early in the broken state, failed or unfinished optimization causing extremely bad performance, missing content or outright scams that best could be called marketing misleading overpromised stuff for the game that never was. Now Anthem, yeah, remember that one, embodies all of this, but it was released in 2019, so it wasn't exactly 3 years ago. Redfall, however, was. Literally broken, missing content and sold on, well, basically lies. This is an embodiment of pure shit. And what about Kerbal Space Program 2? Died even before leaving early access. Yet somehow Skull and Bones was even more bizarre. Seemingly all of the Ubisoft global studios from America, Europe and Asia working on this thing, churning out what frankly would be an asset flip level trash claiming to be the first ever quadruple A game. Yeah, Yves Gilliam... God damn it. Yeah, Yves Gilliam, that quote will stick with us forever. The fucking game cost more than Concord, estimated $600 to $800 million. This garbage was the same league as the fucking Star Citizen. And say what you will about them, but at least they deliver some kind of mechanics and graphics, broken as unfinished as they are. But Skull and Bones, what the fuck happened? Well, the answer is a bit, fucky-ducky, if you will, but the bottom line is, in cases like Anthem, Skull and Bones, Redfall, and other so-called big-budget games that fail like this, the projects ultimately are mishandled and mismanaged very hard. And you know, it's kind of funny, I asked a few friends the same question we're discussing today, and some of them brought up the possibility that these massive game companies, instead of hiring capable developers, designers, artists, and writers, despite the massive budgets, opt to hire mediocre and downright incompetent, let alone diversity hires, to do the job. And again, Pikachu face when no one actually has done anything worthwhile, and your pirate or vampire game plays like an average asset flip, just with better graphics. Now, sure, I mentioned such bizarre anomalies like Golem being a devil spawn abomination of a game that for some reason was even made in the first place, and frankly speaking is still surreal that it was greenlit in the first place. And sure, once in a while you got actual scams like the day before that I also covered for the series, but they're more of a joke than a representation for real failures. And there you have it, 4 main reasons in my mind why mainstream AAA games are a massive failure. But there is more, of course. Still, I guess the lesson of the day is that you can have a great game with no story, just with fun and great gameplay. Or you can have a great game that is almost entirely carried by the story, as long as it's interesting and connects with the player. Hell, you don't even need to be great at both. Having just good and captivating gameplay will tend to succeed. But try to be a greedy bastard and shove a live service along with a shitty monetization in your game and you're sure to fail. In fact, if there is one lesson at the end, you have to actively try to be shit to make a bad game. But hey, what do you think? Did I miss any failures? Do let me know down below. And speaking of that, what about the successes in recent times? Well, far fewer. There are some great examples releasing in the last 3 years as well, so what do you think? Should I cover those too? Well, anyways, as usual, if you find this series interesting, maybe check out my Patreon and support my work there. $1 a day beats a dead horse, hooray! Or something. So, what do you think? Did I miss any other failures between the 2020 and 2025? And come to think of it, is this the worst period in gaming since 80s Crash?